great pleasure of getting a chance to meet and to talk to Josh Eustis of Telefon Tel Aviv. Josh has quite a history in the music business. He's done a lot of things, has his fingers in a lot of stuff, but he also makes some incredible music. The Telefon Tel Aviv stuff, you just recently came out with a new release, right, in December?
Yeah, it was a reissue of the first record, actually.
All right.
So you could say that it's new because it's been unavailable for so long.
Right.
So it kind of feels new. And there's, I guess technically, I included with it all of the really early stuff that Charlie and I were working on together in the late 90s.
Right.
None of which ever saw the light of day, really.
Interesting.
And so that, although it definitely sounds funny to me, it's technically new to people that are, that listen to Telefon Tel Aviv. So.
Right. Well, I mean, the one thing I would say too is that it's sort of got some nice buzz right now. I've been kind of hearing about it and seeing people like talk about it on social media with a lot of vigor. So, it may be old work, but it seems to have really invigorated some interest. So anyway, I haven't said hi yet. So hello, Josh. How you doing?
Hi. How are you?
So let's start off by having you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing most recently. What have you been up to lately?
I've been, the last year, aside from writing new telephone stuff and constantly collating ideas for that pile, I've been spending a lot of time doing this other project, a more recent project with my friend Turk Dietrich from Belong. And this project is called Second Woman. And it's purely instrumental, outsider electronic stuff. It's dub influenced, it's footwork influenced, and all of this sort of stuff. And the big thing is that we've been shifting from, this sort of digital audio workstation workflow into a Max MSP workflow. And this is going to be, of course, a sort of slow, arduous process, but it's the kind of process that easily and happily destroys 14 hours a day for me.
Yeah, it'll do that. That's a fact.
Yeah. I'm remembering math stuff that I forgot from when I was a kid and understanding things I never thought I'd understand and having to use mental muscles that have atrophied disastrously over the last 2 decades. So it feels pretty good, actually.
Well, and I mean, it's funny because, when I've done teaching of Max, one of the things that I always talk to students about, I taught in an art school, and I was like, hey, we all self-selected as artists, which meant that we were on the opposite side of the building from the math kids, right? So doesn't it seem weird that we have to, scrape all that math stuff back into our head? It's a funny dance. As part of the Second Woman project, you talk about it being outsider electronics. What do you mean by that phrase?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a sort of a catch-all phrase for a more technical description. I don't know how technical you want me to go with it, but basically what's happened is we were, for the last 4 or 5 years, just tinkering with kind of techno stuff on and off, Turk and I. Whenever we had time, if he was in LA or if I was in New Orleans, we were working on some techno stuff, and it was fun. And enjoyable as sort of a headspace compositional exercise. But then we started to realize, God, man, I mean, everything is so rigid and it has to be, the kick drums are always exactly this far apart. It started to feel like a prison for both of us. Right. The limits on what's acceptable started to become really frustrating to both of us. And so then we just threw everything out the window and said, okay, well, look, how are we going to make this interesting, at least for us, and get an output, a result that ideally might be, I don't know, a little more interesting or something new, or maybe something that's a little less often heard, or maybe it's a completely new thing. I don't know. And the idea was that, okay, well, let's throw away meter. Let's throw away time signatures. Let's throw away the concept of rhythm and tempo entirely. Let's just light them on fire. Mm-hmm. And so now the idea is that we're thinking of a composition being, subject to the rules of time, and time not being linear. When you're looking at a DAW, it's left to right. Everything's linear. And this started to really make us feel like we were drowning. So instead of thinking of time in terms of being something linear, or a piece of music in terms of being something linear and divided into equal steps of this many, this length or this length for this note value, what about if we thought about everything as being circular and kind of architectural, occupying a space, and then rhythm and tempo being sort of conflated in such a way where we think only about the time between 2 points, between two events. Here's an event, the first event, and then the second event, and what is the distance between those two events? And what happens if we change it, okay? What happens if we look at these distances and we constantly have them updating and constantly have them changing? So then just the grid is gone, completely gone. And it's been this really liberating sort of process for both of us.
That's really interesting and exciting, and also at the same time a little disconcerting because, let's face it, techno came out of sort of like the desire for a repetitious and, somewhat simple dance environment, and to sort of like take that and then twist it on its head to squeeze out a different mechanism for rhythm and meter. That seems like actually a pretty long leap. What for you in doing that is the glue? Because if you're just working kind of like point to point, it seems like you still have to have something to like glue it together as a whole, right?
Right. It's a challenge. For instance, this thing that I've been working on back and forth with Cirque over the last month and a half is this system that we're designing in Max, which is basically a pattern generation system where you can easily set different time values of any, in floats, for instance, between two steps, between any number of steps that you can have. Think of it, basically right now, it's a multi-slider object that we're using to determine the length of every step.
Okay.
And these lengths are being constantly updated. They can be constantly manipulated in real time or new patterns called in as a complete pattern. The thing that glues it together is that after listening to something, let's say if it's 32 steps, after listening to it for a while, you do start to pick up on a repeating pattern.
Sure.
So you do get this sort of semblance of like, oh wait, that little arc of rhythm right there, I heard that, 30 seconds ago. Your brain eventually will start to pick up on these patterns, and you'll hear textures shifting and stuff like this, and slight rhythmic shifts. But it's basically a way of thinking about rhythm without thinking about the grid or tempo or meter. Right. So we think about get fast, get small, make it very dense, or make it very sparse. These are the kinds of things that we're trying to think about when it comes to composition now.
Well, I like too the idea of sort of, taking advantage of the brain's massive pattern matching system, right? To basically say, we'll put together something that ought to work, and now let's let the brain figure out how it works or if it works, right? That's pretty cool. You talk about putting this together in Max. How long have you been using Max? How long have you been a Max guy?
I'm a total beginner when it comes to Max. I tried to teach it to myself 5 separate occasions since the late 90s and failed drastically every time. Just terrific failure. And so I started taking this cadenza course that started in July, and that's Dr. Wright at Stanford teaching this class, and it's just an online class, and you start from nothing, like, okay, this is a bang, okay, this is a message box, this is what they do, and it's totally unlocked all these doors in my head, and I'm kind of obsessed now, and I'm finding that my problem now is delegating time for actually writing music versus coding. So this is this new challenge that I've never had, where now I really do kind of, I wouldn't even begin to say that I have an understanding of Max, but I can make things happen in it that I wasn't able to do before, and I can execute these kind of ideas. And so now I'm just obsessed with this kind of construction and coding and systems side of it, where I have to tell myself, okay, stop, dude, go to the keyboard.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the musical side then, because listening to the telephone work, one of the things that that I like about it is that it seems to be sort of a crossroads. You have things that are sort of like very much traditional melodies, traditional harmony, and some of it fairly complex. But there's also this sort of like glitchy and maybe rattle trap nature to some of the percussive stuff, some of the effects use and stuff like that. And it seems like one of these things where it's the influences are pretty wide ranging and but somehow pulled together to be really organic and really really nice, really inviting, right? Inviting to the listener no matter, I mean, sometimes with things that are more experimental, you have to have a real desire to listen to experimentalism in order to get into it. I would say that the telephone stuff is a lot more inviting to people who maybe are not that dedicated to experimentalism because there is still more of a melodic nature to it. That seems to be, because it's so prevalent in the work, it seems like that is on purpose. What is it in your background musically that is each of those parts? What part is like the traditional music background and what part of it is this experimentalist stuff?
That's interesting. I mean, I guess the experimental stuff kind of really starts with, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I saw Herbie Hancock Rocket, the video for Rocket. Mm-hmm. And it seemed to me, of course, as an 8-year-old boy or whatever, it seemed so futuristic and experimental. And so for me, but it's an emphasis on futurism. For me, it wasn't ever so much about, is it experimental, but is it a vision of the future? Is it a vision that we haven't encountered yet? It's a potential idea of what could be. It's almost in a way kind of sci-fi escapism that me and Charlie was definitely obsessed with this kind of idea. Turk is obsessed with these kind of ideas. My whole group of friends, we've always been in love with that. So it's always been an effort to kind of push things forward as best we can, to try to present a new idea, a vision of the future or in some way. And that kind of coupled with a more traditional music training background, which was, in high school, I studied classical guitar with this terrific Cuban maestro named Elias Barrero, and he lived in New Orleans at the time, and he taught me for 3 or 4 years, and then I went to university in New Orleans and studied music composition and theory, and my teachers there were just really, I don't know how to say it in any other way, they were really hip, they really got it. There wasn't this like really kind of self-absorbed, stiff academia problem there. It was very much like, my teacher who studied along with guys like Paul Lansky at Columbia, back in the day, Dr. James Walsh and his wife, Dr. Janice Saslaw, they're both theoretically off the charts. I mean, they understand things about music and how it's written and how to break it down into pieces that few people have this sort of kind of musical enlightenment that these two teachers had. But they were also really great at kind of helping me along in finding my voice. There's a really strong strain of kind of serialism and atonalism in school, and it's academia sort of tilts you that way, I find. And I was good at that stuff. I was better at the academic stuff than I was at the tonal stuff. I had a way easier time with Schoenberg than I did with Bach. Uh-huh. And my teachers laughed at me for it and kind of snickering into their sleeves about it, because I really had trouble figuring out 4/5/1s and telling the difference between a French 6 and an Italian 6. But you could put Schoenberg in front of me and I could break it down into its atoms quickly. It somehow just made more sense to me. But I wanted to write tonal music. Mm-hmm. And everything that I wrote on my own seemed to be tonal music. It seemed to be melodic. And Dr. Walsh was just like, "Hey, dude, look, bro, you don't have to like be Schoenberg, man. I mean, not everybody can be Schoenberg. Just write some pretty shit, man. The world needs it. Don't feel weird about it." And then I realized, oh, okay, it's all right for me to go this way with it. It's all right for me to write tonal music or pretty music or whatever.
Well, I have to say that just that narrative kind of blows my head off because of how it is kind of radically different from almost everybody's experience in academic music study, right?
Yeah, literally the opposite, you know?
Because so often what it is the instructors in school, they basically say, you need to experience these other things, and so we're going to force you to do it, and you are going to take whatever voice you have and set it to the side, and maybe someday when you're an adult you get to use it again, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, you're not a composer yet.
Right. So that's amazing, and that must have been incredibly freeing.
This was how those compositions lessons went. My composition class, the way it's structured at Loyola in New Orleans, is that you have a composition teacher, and those lessons are one-on-one. And if you're a composition theory major, and so Dr. Walsh, like I'd go to his house and we're like hanging out in sweatpants on the couch, just talking about music, and he would say, "Hey, okay, look, we've been chatting for a month, man. Now write me something. Just bring me something, whatever it is." And I was like, well, I'm not really much of a composer yet. He's like, hey, bro, as soon as you put a note of music on a page, you're a composer, bro.
Right.
And that was a kind of an eye-opening thing that it doesn't always have to be this sort of lofty academic, self-absorbed thing. It can be something really lowbrow, even near to mortal heart, simple, and it
emotional,
still has value. Yeah,
right.
it still has value.
So how did you get from sort of like getting introduced or reintroduced to your own voice and allowing it? So my assumption is the way you viewed it then was that you were able to take your kind of like personal vision for music, but also combine all of this learning that you got at Loyola, and it ended up giving you sort of like a better you. Is that a fair way to think of it?
Yeah, I mean, better. I don't know about better, but
Well,
I mean, all of that kind of, let's call it classical training, although I use the term loosely. I learned all of that stuff, but my teachers definitely let me follow my own path on it.
right.
And I'm eternally grateful for that. But all of that kind of coupled with right around the same time when I was in college, was when when I was finishing up, was when Charlie and I started working together. And Charlie was the one that initially had this idea of like, hey, dude, like I want to create these pieces of music, right, where the rhythms are, maybe the rhythm is essentially the same thing or it's within a certain feel, but I want to see if we can, how do we make it constantly change?
Right.
And then that kind of talked to me on a compositional level because something that I was obsessed with was Schoenberg's idea of developing variation, which, again, Dr. Walsh broke this down for me clear as day, where Schoenberg would introduce a musical idea and repeat it a lot. But every time it repeats, something changes. Something's different about it. There's some little characteristic about it that's morphed. And that was fascinating to me. And then so Charlie's idea, we kind of immediately figured out, well, okay, cool. What if we like have all of this kind of sound design stuff and it's changing constantly? We introduce a little riff and then we just light it on fire. We send it off into space. It's scuttled. It's gone. It might be 1 bar. It might be a 4-bar thing or a 2-bar thing or a 2.5 bar. It doesn't matter. So the idea about everything on the first Telefon Tel Aviv record, Fahrenheit, Fair Enough, is based on this idea of just building riff after riff after riff that just never repeat, really.
Right. Well, it's interesting because what it ends up feeling like, and again, the rhythms tend to be kind of, I don't know, it's the word when I listened to it, the word that kept on coming to my head was sort of like rattle trap, right? It's kind of had a loose feel, even though it was tightly timed, but it always felt like you were kind of falling forward into it, right? And I think the constant change, sort of like the way that gets translated emotion, is sort of like this disconcert, this sort of like falling into it, right? But it was always married to these longer form or longer duration lines, both melodic and harmonic lines, which again sort of like provided a ear glue to the whole thing as well.
Yeah, I can say honestly that although you would never hear it when you listen to Fahrenheit Fair Enough, a big stylistic inspiration was The Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails because, well, first of all, I got that record when I was 16, so it was formative for me.
Right.
But the thing that blew me away about, and it was so cool, playing with Trent and all, it was great to get under the hood and really figure out why those songs worked so well. And the thing that blew me away about it, and Charlie as well, was what they got away with making that record. They made this pop record, right? It was, Closer was all over the radio, and it still is. They play it during lunch hour on whatever the rock station is out here in LA. It still plays, but it's the weirdest pop record that's ever been made. It's so far out there production-wise. It's insane. It's literally crazy. If you tried to make a record like that and tried to get it on the radio today, it would never happen. It cannot happen. It would not happen. It is impossible. But he did it. And so what it inspired us to do was, okay, what can we get away with? How can we need to pull people in, right? We want people to, we're not going to write a pop record. It's going to be an instrumental, weirdo electronic record. But how do we pull people in? How can we get all of this skittery, chaotic percussion? How do we get it to blow right past them? Where they can listen to that if they want, or they can completely disregard it if they want to disregard it. So it was more of kind of trying to hoodwink the listener into paying attention to all of this kind of heavy DSP work or whatever. And the way we did it was by, having these instrumental elements and these melodic elements and harmonic elements, and having that stuff also kind of not just tacked on with the percussion, but, blended in a way where sometimes that stuff breaks apart in the same way the percussion does, or sometimes it's juxtaposed sharply.
So when Fahrenheit Fair Enough, when did that first come out?
September 18th, 2001.
2001. Okay.
Yeah.
So this re-release is like 15 years later. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It's something because it really holds up as, it could, for all intents and purposes, it could be a current thing, which says something about the production and something about your compositional technique. But the way the world looked in 2001 is pretty vastly different from what it is now. What were the tools that you used to make this thing? Because right now, a lot of this would be done with Max and Max for Live and Ableton Live and some control surfaces, and you can kind of imagine how you would take on a project like that now. In 2001, you had like stone tablets and chisels, in comparison. Right. What was the kind of production tools that you used to get that done?
Pro Tools 5.0, Digidesign 001 interface.
Okay.
G4, a gray G4 tower, the earlier blue gray one.
Right.
400 megahertz or whatever. And so Pro Tools and Reactor.
Oh,
that's largely it. There are a couple of instances of other things happening. There's some sound hack stuff in there. There's some SFX machine stuff in there. There's a tiny touch of Super Collider stuff in there. There's even a tiny touch of Max stuff in there. But it was all stuff that we just kind of found online or got passed around. And then we would load our own samples into it or whatever and see what we got out of it. But it was mostly Reactor, almost all Reactor, and just Pro Tools audio suite, just manually processing every little sound that went in there.
Wow. Boy, you just set me on a remember the days swirl there, bringing up SFX machine. Oh, I used to love that thing. I forgot all about it. That was an amazing piece of work.
He's still got it, and it's current, and it's still updated, and it's still only like $50, and it's terrific. So
it's unreal.
Yeah, I think I'm going to dust that one off pretty soon. Also.
Yeah, well, I used to use it a lot inside of Peak, and I kind of miss Peak a lot because Peak had some weirdo editing tools too that were really fun to use, and that unfortunately is completely gone. But it sounds to me like the Telephone collaboration with Charlie was, it was super fertile for you. It was something that really got you moving in interesting directions and stuff. I think is it 2009 that Charlie died?
Yeah, it was January 2009.
How did you deal with that? When someone who is a collaborator, someone who sort of pushed you artistically, but also, was clearly a great partner to work with, how do you handle that? And as an artist, I can't imagine.
That's a tough question. I mean, yeah, it's very different than handling it personally, which was a whole other set
Right,
of
right.
issues and problems and grief and all that. But artistically, I'm kind of only just now sort of figuring out how to handle it because I never really dealt with it. I sort of avoided it
Yeah,
artistically
yeah.
by just not really focusing on Telefon Tel Aviv and doing other things and doing Puscifer and Nine Inch Nails and Sons of Magdalene and all this other stuff out of production for other bands. Now I'm in a place where I'm working on all this Telefon Tel Aviv stuff, and I have a hard drive full of ideas, and it's exactly the point where I would hand it off to Charlie, and he would say, "Yeah, this is cool. Yeah, this one. Oh, I know just what to do for this one."
Right.
And then he would bring me back a mess, and then I would clean it up, and then we'd finish the song together. So I have to get inside his headspace right now, and
Interesting.
it's difficult. There's nobody really did that does what he could
Right.
do. He's not like a replaceable.
Right.
It's not like, oh, I just need another guitar player.
Yeah, nor was there a formula because even with those
No.
early works, even song by song, you could just see there wasn't a formula. It's like, well, here's my hit gig, right? It was personality. Well, I appreciate you saying that, and the reason I even felt I frankly, I like this to be about art and technology. I don't like it to be necessarily about people stuff, right? But you talk a lot, already in our conversation. You've talked a lot about how important and influential Charlie was, and so I appreciate you talking about it. I hope it's not uncomfortable.
No, I mean, it's gotten easier to talk about as the years pass. Because now the grief isn't really as near anymore. It's not
Yeah,
that it doesn't get easier, you just get better at dealing with it. But now
right,
I can kind of more easily look back and remember like, oh, okay, now I can think technically. I
right,
wasn't ever really prepared to think about what he would have done, but now I can be working on a piece of music, for instance, and go, Charlie would want to bring this into OS9 Pro Tools and like smear it around in Hyperprism for a while. Like I think that's what he would do here. Or like,
right,
no, it's Pluggo time. Like this is I know Charlie for sure. Rye, wheat, a spectral filter are all going to get piled up on this thing, and it's going to get smeared around. So it's kind of fun. It's difficult because he and we're so opposite about composition a lot of the time, but it is fun because then it gives me I was kind of always compositionally the fastidious one, and he was always the chaotic one,
okay,
and I always we always wanted to be I always wanted to be chaotic and messy and savant, and he always wanted to be like really organized and have everything in order and be good at building things and arranging and we were really in awe of each other's abilities, I think, like that. But so the beauty of it now, and I feel that he really got cheated by leaving us too soon, is that now I get to be well, I am the way I am, so it's still measured and precise and all of that. But now I can smear my food around the plate as much as I want. I can be messy and throw spaghetti at the wall like Charlie, and it's kind of fun because now it's sort of pretending in a way.
right. That's great. It's neat to be able to have that kind of thing to bank on, to look back on and say, okay, I saw this in action, and I'm going to try and channel some of it. That actually, because it's difficult for us as artists sometimes to be able to step outside the boundaries of what we do. Because
Yeah,
and
of
you kind of
course.
talk about it there. It's almost like I'm not sure I have permission to throw the spaghetti against the wall because I'm not
Right.
spaghetti against the wall guy. Is anyone gonna? Am I gonna get shit upon because I threw the spaghetti? Are people gonna say, "Oh, he's a spaghetti faker," right? you
Yeah,
know.
totally.
So let's talk about some of the other projects that you've worked on as well. So um, I've seen discussions about Puscifer.
That's Maynard Keenan's, well, one of his many projects.
Okay,
Maynard Keenan from Tool.
right.
Puscifer is kind of like it's a band, but it's also in a way like a theater troupe in a way where there's characters that get played throughout the set and stuff
Oh,
like that.
okay.
But it does hinge around records, and he's done three
Right.
records,
Okay.
and on and off from about 2007 till let's say 2013 or so, I was helping him, record the records and sort of assistant producer to Matt Mitchell, who's like kind of the main songwriter, the main producer for that project, and mixing and recording and playing in the band and stuff. And that was like that's very different than anything I'd ever done before. It was much more straight ahead kind of rock with electronic influences and stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'd never done anything like that. But working with Maynard is awesome. He's a shredder in the studio. Obviously, it's really weird when you're recording vocals and you hear that voice come through the microphone. It's pretty shocking. And Matt Mitchell is a tremendously gifted musician and studio guy. So I learned a lot from both of them doing that.
So given that is kind of musically a lot different of a place than much of what you've done, what drew you into that project?
Maynard. Just okay. Like, hey, dude, we need another set of hands, and I want to get somebody that can complement Matt's abilities in the studio, and would you be down to come out to LA? And yeah, you can stay at my house, man, and you can stay there as long as you want. Just live there, man. It's awesome. We got a carriage house. You can live there, and let's make records and let's go tour. I left Chicago at that point. That was early 2011. It was like, okay, cool. I need to go do something else anyway, because I've been sitting in Chicago winter for 2 years, basically just not really doing anything, not writing music or anything. So it was good. It kind of resurrected my interest in writing music and making music, whatever it would be, and getting used to being on stage again. And it was great. It was a lot of fun.
You say getting on stage again. When you and Charlie were doing Telefon, did you perform, or was it just a recording group?
No, I mean we played a ton of shows, of shows. And all over the world, and we liked to play shows. Hated to travel, but loved to go to the places and meet the people and the promoters and the kids that would come to the show, and it was a lot of fun. We definitely played a ton of shows, and I've started doing that again this year, and it's been great. I thought I was going to be hating it, and I've honestly been loving it. It's been awesome.
Well, that's great. That's cool to hear. Now, another one of the projects, or one of the things you mentioned it a little bit, you actually were part of the Nine Inch Nails touring group for a little while, right?
Yeah.
That must have been pretty crazy.
Yeah, that was really crazy because, for instance, touring with Puscifer to me was very cush. We had a tour bus, we had nice hotel rooms every night. It was, these big, beautiful theater venues, and we had technicians to help us organize all the live stuff, and it was great. And then Nine Inch Nails was like that power 10. It was. I'm just not used to touring like that. Like, oh my God, I'm flying in business class. Are you serious? Like, this is I have a first class plane ticket. Anyway, that side of it is completely crazy. The other side of it is that if you're working with Trent and you're not inspired by him, then you're a fucking asshole, basically. He's incredible to work around, and Trent can be a hard ass, and he'll shout and tell you suck. But honestly, for all the horror stories that I heard going into it, he never once got with me about like that. If there was something that I was doing that wasn't up to par, he would gently and very quietly pull me aside and say, "Hey, dude, look, I know you've been working on this, but it's still not quite where I would like it to be. Can we look at it like this? Can you or practice it a little more tonight? See if you can tighten that part up." He never got super negative with me.
Oh, that's
and that worked. That worked well. That inspired me a lot. That kind of, I can accept criticism as long as it's not, dude, you suck.
Right.
I'm really good at accepting criticism when it's like, hey, dude, you could definitely do this better. Then, oh shit, you're right. Okay, I will do it better. So I like to think that he got the best out of me.
Interesting. Well, it's, you have to give credit, because what that kind of points to is somebody who doesn't necessarily have a formula, right? Maybe some people need to get yelled at. Maybe some people need to be brought to the side and talked to. And being the person that can figure out what's the best approach, that's actually pretty savvy. if that's actually what was going on. I hope it is.
I guess so. I mean, I was probably the only one that really needed to get scolded anyway. You know what I mean? The rest of the guys in the band are all tremendous musicians. I'm not much of a player. I can play a lot of things a little bit. I'm not really particularly great at any one instrument. The thing is that, yeah, if somebody comes at me, raw dog, shouting at me and all that, then I just turn it off and just go, okay, dude, whatever. Like, right. Sure, I'll get right on it. But if they come to me, I just, negativity and shouting and all of that is never works on me.
It's counterproductive. Yeah.
It's so counterproductive for me. Like, I'll get pissed off about it at first, and then I'll be like, dude, who do you think you are? You can talk to me like that. And then I step outside of myself and get kind of like, oh, dude, whatever. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And for instance, in Puscifer, for instance, that never happens. It's super family atmosphere. Maynard is super cool with everybody in the band. Everybody in the band gets along with everybody. It's really supportive. Everybody's helping each other out. Nine Inch Nails is a little bit more every man is an island in a way when it comes to parts and rehearsal and stuff like this. But Trent leaves it up to you to kind of figure out with some guidance what it is, how it is that you're going to do what you're going to do.
Got it. Sure. Another project that I know you were involved in was called Sons of Magdalene.
Mm-hmm.
What was that?
Well, it's morphed over time, but Sons of Magdalene is kind of a catch-all for things that aren't as things that are more gauzy in general than Telefon Tel Aviv. I've done a lot of tape music under that name that's not really been released, but I had a release in 2014, the only full length I've ever done, and that was kind of gritty, sort of synth pop recorded to tape vibes, and but you're looking at it through a dusty window pane. It's all blurred.
Right. And
then earlier this year, I put a cassette out on Aesthetic House of two older tape loop pieces that I'd done in 2007, 2008 that never got released. And the Aesthetic House guys put that out earlier this year. And it's rooted in techno, but it's much more sort of vaporous.
Nice.
And yeah, it's all really pretty simple. Sons of Magdalene is much more simple. I don't want to say easier, but it's definitely simpler than any of my other projects.
I'm going to have to dig into that a little more because that sounds like something I would be interested in. Although I'm kind of intrigued by all your work, but this sort of brings up a question, and you sound like as good of a person to ask as anything. When you start working under or as part of a lot of different groups or with a variety of different monikers, because we talked about the Second Woman thing also and some of this other stuff, how do you sort of maintain a connection to people? How do you sort of whisper in people's ears, oh yeah, I'm doing this and I did that and I've got this cassette out too. How do you make it so that people can stay connected to you in that way? Or do you not care? Maybe you don't care.
Yeah, I kind of don't. It's not that I don't care. But I don't. But I do. I want people to listen. But I'm such a musical polygamist. I can't musically be with one woman for the rest of my life. I've got all these things because I have all of these itches that need to get scratched musically, and I can't do them with one project because it would just be a goddamn disaster. It would be a mess. It would be unfocused and chaotic and in a not very good way, I think. So I have all of these little outlets that, I work every day. Some days it's only 2 hours, but most of the time now it's really long hours every day. And I just work on music, and whatever it is, it gets put in a pile, It gets put in the Sons of Magdalene pile. Well, it's been a while since anything's been put in that pile. But it gets put in the Telefon Tel Aviv pile or the Second Woman pile or, how to let people, I don't know how to connect to people about it. I just try to play shows and, hey, there's a Facebook post about here's the record, you can listen to it or you can ignore it, whatever. You can ignore it. How would that be different than any other day of my life? Something I'm working on has been ignored. It's fine. I'm pretty used to that by now. But I don't know. It's just fun to make it. I don't know how to do anything except make things. If I'm not making things, I don't know what to do. And I kind of just twiddle my thumbs and smoke too much and pet my bunny to the point where he gets annoyed. So I have to be making things, always kind of putting something on the hard drive.
I'm curious now about the way that you're working, kind of what you explained with the Second Woman Project, but it sounds like it's kind of taking over your life, this idea of working with Max MSP. First of all, it sounds like you've never really been a hardware guy. You know, when we talk about your work with Charlie, you were talking about it mostly being software related. A lot of, Max MSP certainly is a software devotional, right? What have you ever been a hardware guy, or is that just something you've not been interested in?
Oh no, I'm definitely a hardware guy too.
Right.
Oh yeah, okay. I've had to regrettably sell off a lot of my synths recently, just because rent in LA and because I'm slow writing a record. But that's fine. I found that I wasn't using my I have had a synth collection since the mid '90s. I still have a fair bit of it, but. Yeah, I mean, like, for instance, the last Telefon Tel Aviv record, that's all hardware. There's software manipulation going on, but all of the sources of it are hardware synths and stuff like that. Okay. And even on the first record and the second record, there's still a lot of bass guitar and Fender Rhodes and, Moog synthesizers and stuff like this and guitar pedals. I love all that stuff. But now I'm I just had such a huge studio setup and a huge console and a ton of outboard and synths everywhere, and I'm just trying to pare down my life and my rig to just bare essentials. It was really wonderful having an Oberheim expander at my beck and call if I wanted to record one thing with it, but I wasn't using it often enough to justify it taking up the space. So now I'm stripping everything down to nothing. Like literally, my studio is a desk with an RME Fireface on it and a monitor and a pair of NS10Ms.
Sure. Do you still play guitar very much?
No. I mean, I would. There hasn't been a need for it. One or both of those things will for sure turn up on the Telefon record. I'm pretty confident. And the Rhodes, I'm going to pull that out of storage because I'm realizing now that all the best stuff I've ever written, I wrote on the Rhodes. And if I'm going to write something meaningful, I need to go pull that out of storage and find a place to put it here so that I can write something. But
I was going to say, to me, one of the things, if I think of Telefon music, there's a Rhodes ringing in my head.
There's a lot of that. It's kind of been one of the. I don't think we used it on the last record. Oh, there's tiny little bits and pieces of it, but it's not recognizable as a Rhodes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's all over the first record. I mean, it defines the first record.
Right, yeah.
And I feel like there's ways where I could do it that it wouldn't be referential to my earlier stuff, to the stuff that Charlie and I were doing early on. I think I can still use the Rhodes in a way that's not exactly, here's Fahrenheit 2.0, not as good. You didn't have, I'll do something different with it. I'll decontextualize it.
Somehow. So is that something, though, that you worry about? Do you worry about coming across as trying to put out a Fahrenheit 2.0?
No, because I definitely have not even come close to, it was a thing Charlie and I were very specific about. It's like, okay, we're just going to do stuff.
Yeah.
And whatever comes out is whatever comes out. Whatever we feel like doing is what we're going to do. We're not going to overthink it. We're not going to try to target an audience. We're definitely, the main thing that we need to do is not repeat ourselves.
Right.
So, naturally there's people that are pissed off like, I want another record like Fahrenheit. But then there's other people that are like, I want another record like Map. And then other people that are, I want another record like Immolate Yourself. And it's like, well, guys, we did those 3 records already, and I'm glad you like them individually, but you have them, and you can listen to them. I don't want to repeat anything that Charlie and I did before, and I know that if he were still around, he would feel exactly the same way.
Sure. So now that you're paring down and you're kind of moving away from the big hardware pile, And I'll tell you, just I know for myself, I kind of have this like sine wave in my life, right? It's where I'll get a bunch of equipment, I'll get a bunch of gear, and then all of a sudden it's like I can't stand all this fucking gear around me, right? And so then it all goes out the door, and I pare down, and I'm like sitting in a coffee shop with the headphones on, working on stuff, and it's like, oh God, if only I had that gear, right?
Of course.
I mean. I think that's kind of an ebb and flow that happens. What is it about paring down that gives you freedom? What is it that draws you to that? Because right now, I mean, I would say that for a lot of people, sort of in the music tech, overall gestalt of the thing, right? People are like running towards hardware right now, accumulating more hardware. When people talk about their great studio, it's just like dripping with vintage synths and vintage amps and vintage mics, right?
Yeah. Yeah. My question to these people is, okay, cool. That's great. I'm glad you're rich. Now, what are you going to do with all that shit?
Right.
Oh, you got a VC3? Good. You better blow my mind with the thing.
Right.
Otherwise, why did you get it?
Yeah.
If you're not blowing my mind with the thing, if you're not doing something with that $15,000 synthesizer that's amazing, then you bought it for vanity and to show it off and to talk about it at synth meetups, and there's like, I mean, I don't want to go off on the whole modular thing because there are a lot of guys doing really terrific stuff with modular synths, and I'm not even going to get into naming names of the guys who I think are doing great stuff and the guys who I think aren't. But there's, it's pretty obvious, who is and who isn't. But also there's just such this kind of boys club of like, oh, check out this new zip zap modulator from whatever the hell company, it doesn't matter. Like, oh, here's a new thing that I have to have, a new thing that I have to add in. And it's like, well, okay, that's all great, but what are you making with it?
Right.
Like, unless you're Richard Devine, who just is, Richie's got this like savant level understanding of how all that works. And Detachi, I can't think of his first name, but.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Detachi, yeah.
I don't know why I can't think of his first name right now. Anyway, he's just terrific stuff on a modular. Robert Aiki Aubrey Lowe does terrific stuff on modular synths. Keith Whitman. Anyway, there are a lot of guys doing. Tom does great stuff on a modular. Like, I went to his house and he's showing me these beautiful patches. You can get really meaningful results out of all of it. But the whole boys club of just everybody just amassing these tremendous amounts of hardware, ultimately, to me, kind of just looks like a show of wealth more than anything. And it kind of turns me off.
It ends up sometimes, and not always, like you say, there are people, and I think that there's some value in the modular thing. For one reason I think it's valuable is because there's no equivalent of a preset. So that actually forces people to have to learn about what it is that the thing does, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that there's value to that, but I think there is a large extent to where that ends up looking like, baseball card collectors, right? Or comic book collectors or whatever. Yeah, numismatic coin collectors, right? Yeah. But now, despite all that, it actually sounds to me like you've been well embedded in modular systems, except they've taken the approach of being reactor or super collider or
Max MSP,
Max MSP or a DAW with a lot of plugins, which is just a different kind of modular system. So it's clear to me that sort of like that building things concept is sort of critical to the way that you approach sound design, at least, yeah?
Of course. Always. It always has. I mean, our whole thing, even early on, the only way to do it was to print a bunch of stuff in Reactor that sounded weird and then pull it into Pro Tools and slather Pluggo all over it and just chains of plugins just process through this and then that and then process through this, then this, then this. And so, yeah, in a lot of ways it kind of is modular,
Yeah. So, but the actual hardware modulars just never spoke to you, huh?
No, it's not entirely true because I had a Buchla 200E system for a while.
Oh, well, okay. There you go.
Pretty big one. And and I loved it, and the sound of it was terrific, and it
Yeah,
was so much fun, and I had no idea what I was doing with the
I
thing.
see.
No idea what was happening, because that stuff doesn't work the way subtractive synthesis normally works anyway. It's very different than, the Buchla stuff's super weird.
Right.
I found myself, okay, working on a song, like, oh, I want to do a bass line kind of thing. I would like it to be a kind of sequency thing. Oh, well, I've got a Buchla here with a step sequencer in it. Let me see what I get out of it. 12 hours later, I've got, you know what I mean? It was just a wormhole.
Oh, see, you've hit right there. You hit on something that I think nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about the wormhole. I I think it's great that you even said it that way, but nobody wants to talk about it because there is this sense that I get, and I certainly know it for myself, that I can be in the middle of doing musical work, and then all of a sudden the allure of patching and making a patch takes over, and I even forgot that I was working on a song.
Yeah. It's dangerous, man. I mean,
It is
that's a problem
dangerous.
with Max MSP also,
Oh, yeah.
because I love the patching side of it now, and I learned something. I learned several new things every time I attempt to patch,
Right.
and I can do it. It's the kind of work that I could do it all day, every day without stopping, because it's fun and new and weird to me.
Uh-huh.
But I like I said, I have to give myself, time to write,
Sure.
which is, nighttime. I like to do the patching stuff during the day, and then I like to, when my mind is, sharp and analytical, and then when I'm
Right.
later after sundown or whatever, and I'm starting to be a little tired or my head feels a little foggy, is generally a better time for me to kind of sit at a keyboard and write something.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you have tricks that you use. Like some people, their trick is to say, you know, every so often I'm just going to like make sure that I print something to tape or whatever, and then, that's going to be the working point or whatever. This idea of patching during the day, recording during the night, that seems like kind of a self-imposed trick, right? Do you have
Yeah,
anything
this
else
is
that you
the
use to
new
keep yourself from going into the shithole?
one. No, I mean, a lot of what has worked in the past, and it's worked for me and Charlie, is doing this thing where you reverse your schedule, where you only sleep during light and you only work during dark when everybody else is asleep and all the phones are quiet and your email's not blowing up and nothing's happening.
Hmm.
And it's weird because it does two things. First of all, it lets you totally focus on what you're trying to do. Um, but second of all, it sort of isolates you from society, from your friends, from your family, from everything around you. And in a way, this can be good, but it also, after a period of time, becomes very destructive. And you have to reverse the schedule and go back to being daytime and go back to being a normal person and seeing your friends. But sometimes I find when I need to really write something, the best time to do it is alone at night when no one is around and I can just be completely uh, shut off from the world
Sure.
for a few hours. So as this record starts to kind of take shape, that's going to happen more and more, where I'll want to be awake in the middle of the night and sleeping during the day.
All right. Well, it sounds to me like you are kind of mentally ramping yourself up for doing the thing. What is kind of the short term future for you? What projects? What do you want to get out the door?
Well, there's a second Woman EP end of this month, then the full length in April, the second full length in April.
Okay.
Trying to get the first sort of batch of telephone stuff for the fourth record finished. And I'll be doing some shows end of February and then again end of March. And I would like to be playing some of this new stuff out, testing it in a live situation to see how I feel about it.
It sounds like a pretty aggressive schedule. When you're talking about playing out, I mean, you're in LA now, right?
Correct.
When you talk about playing out, are you just talking about playing out around town, or do you think that you might try and put together some kind of little tour thing?
Oh no, these are little mini tours.
Right.
There'll be an East Coast run at the end of February, and then sort of Midwest and Canada beginning of March. Then end of March is for 2 weeks. I'm in Europe.
Cool. Interesting. Sounds great.
Yeah.
If you happen to be in Minneapolis, make sure you let me know, and I'll be there.
Oh,
With
for
bells
sure.
and
That actually may happen. I'll see about that.
Cool. And what do you think what do you have in mind maybe for the longer term future? Is there any direction that you kind of feel your artistic nature drawing you? Is there a direction you see yourself going?
Yeah, but no. I'm not really a visionary type of guy. I just kind of stand out there in the tide and let it take me where it takes me.
That's
Try not
awesome.
to think about too much, you know.
Well, that's kind of cool because, frankly, I don't get very many people who will actually say that. I'm like almost 160 of these interviews in, and most people at least want it to sound like they really have a grasp on the future. I think it's kind of cool to say, well, you know what? The wind blows, and I follow the wind. I think that's actually pretty cool,
I mean,
too.
you kind of, what can you do, man? I mean, you can't fight the tide.
Right.
You know?
True
You can
enough.
sit there and tread water all day, but I mean, you're just going to tire yourself out.
Indeed. Well, Josh, I want to thank you so much for the time. This was a fantastic chat, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to meet up with you. Next time I'm in LA, I'll probably give your door a rap.
Yeah, definitely.
But if nothing else, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, man. It's been great.
All right, bye. Many thanks to Josh for the great interview. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks a lot for listening. Make sure that you pass this along to friends, family, whoever else needs to hear it. You know better than I do. So in any case, thank you so much, and I'll catch you next week. Bye.